What up, YouTube? This video is part one of installing this one-of-a-kind ceiling made from old growth, vertical grain, Doug fir, and American black walnut. This project took me 3 weeks from start to finish, and this video is going to feature all of the woodworking that was necessary for the ceiling. Without a doubt, this is my favorite project that I've ever done, and quite literally is a piece of my heart and soul. I hope you guys enjoy. I'll be documenting and sharing everything about this DIY van conversion. If you'd like to follow along, by all means, hit that subscribe button. So to kick off the project, we were testing the tongue and grooves. We wanted to make sure that we had the correct overall dimensions of how these tongue and grooves were going to fit, so that we could have enough flex to basically match the contours of the van ceiling, but still maintain the maximum amount of rigidity and strength possible. And so here we're just making a couple of fingerboards that we're actually going to end up using throughout the project, just to help basically give a second set of hands and keep pressure on the board while we're making various cuts. So one of the major objectives that we had for this entire project was to hide as best as we could any mounting hardware throughout the entire build, which is why we chose to use the tongue and groove. Was that then gave us the option to essentially drill and mount all of the screws within that tongue and groove and effectively hide the mounting points from visibility.
Yeah. So then, hypothetically, that's pretty snug.
Don't you think that's gonna look pimp?
It does look pretty pimp.
You will be cherished forever.
No joke, you guys. My dad has been hoarding these boards since 2008, waiting for a project worthy of using them. I dare say, though, we found just such a project.
In the moonlight.
What? Wow.
All the boards except this one were amazingly straight. This guy was a little squirrely and had enough natural tension in the grain that when I cut him, the two halves then sprang apart.
It makes me want to do it more. I'm like a 4-year-old.
I'm glad you're sober. I hope you stay sober, but I wish I knew you when you were partying.
So now that we've ripped one side of all these boards with a perfectly straight edge, we're able to cut them down to their final width, which was 5 3/16 of an inch. and we're just using a table saw to make this cut.
Particularly,
5 1/16, 3
even if
16.
you have
Look at that. Look at that. Look at it. Just look at it.
Yeah. You see that?
That's damn good.
What are you trying? I see that.
What? In 2 seconds. 2 seconds. Look at how much of a mess we have. What am I supposed to do? Insane. That's like perfect. That is a lot of wood.
That's what she said. In all seriousness, routing these 14-foot long boards was something of an ordeal. What we ended up doing was basically setting up 4 individual sawhorses, and then I clamped a piece of plywood sheet that I had left over from the furring strips to 2 kind of pairs of those sawhorses, spread those apart, and then across the 2 sort of makeshift tables clamped my 14-foot long boards. This system worked great and was super rigid. So after routing all of the thinner boards, we had what I constantly referred to as the beauty board. This was the centerpiece of the entire ceiling. It was the most beautiful board of all of them, and I wanted to feature it in its full width right down the center of my van.
Might not look like much. That's all of yesterday's work. Anyways, we got more work to do. Time to clean up. That's nuts.
So with all of the routing done, the next step was to cut everything down to its rough approximation of the final length. So typically what I would do is cut off just the very edge, giving us a nice clean cut, and then from the opposite side we would make the final dimension cut so that we had clean edges on both sides. So moving on, I knew that American black walnut would contrast beautifully with the American Doug fir, and I figured a fantastic place to feature it would be integrating it with some kind of LED lighting. And so what we ended up doing here is planing down our rough walnut board. However, it was pretty warped, and so we decided to go ahead and cut it down to its approximate lengths. And then when we milled everything down, similar to the same process for the Doug fir, we were contouring the least amount for that warp. And that gave us just over 2 inches before taking out the tongue and groove. Now you might have noticed that the groove is actually not centered in the walnut, and that is quite intentional. I wanted the walnut to sit proud relative to the Doug fir so that it would add a little bit of depth to the ceiling as well. Now, routering the female portion of the tongue and groove on such small pieces of wood was easy enough with the hand router. However, I did not feel quite so confident to do the male portion, or the tongue of the tongue and groove, with the hand router, so I went ahead and set up the router table. And as you can see here, since it's cutting basically the entire thickness and it's taking off a 1/2 inch, you don't have that much material left overall. And despite my best efforts, thankfully I have all 10 fingers still, but what you'll see is on this piece right here, this super long piece, just kind of the monotony of it all. And I didn't realize that my one and only fingerboard was basically holding all the way to the board. And as soon as it gets past, my work material then went up and through the router, basically gouging the tongue of my tongue and groove. Thankfully, it wasn't cosmetic. It was just on the tongue. But afterwards, I went ahead and added a second fingerboard to help support the weight of the board. And after that, thankfully, we had 0 issues.
Okay, so 5.1 millimeter light. Okay. Look at how he is standing. Yes. Distinguished. This is what we are testing. LED light strip, countersunk. However, we are not quite in as much as I would like, so 9.5. Okay. Yes, deeper. Okay.
So rather than risk a trial and error on my precious walnut that I've spent so much time milling, I went ahead and ran a few practice runs of cutting the groove for my LED light into a couple of scrap pieces, and then kind of honed in on the exact measurements of how deep that groove needed to be and just how wide I needed to cut that groove to have it fit my LED light strip basically perfectly. And what I ended up doing was essentially cutting a facsimile, or kind of like a copy of the walnut, almost exact, and then testing the measurements so that after accounting for the material that we're cutting away for the light strip, that basically the remaining material on either side of that LED groove would be exactly matching. And after a few test runs, it definitely took me a little longer than I thought. We did zone in on the perfect increments, and I have got to say I am quite pleased with the results. So once I decided the perfect starting point, I went ahead and cut all 4 pieces of my walnut accent board with the exact same cut all the way through, and then after finishing all 4 cuts, adjusted the sled the one and only time that we moved the sled, and then went through a second time, widening this groove to the exact dimensions of my LED light.
So far, so good. Let's not F this up. Hypothetically, as you, yeah, that's looking pretty freaking good. Okay. Oh, heck yes. Oh my goodness. Heck yes. One. Hell yeah, man. Oh, hell yeah. Oh, hell yeah. Yes, indeedy. Wow, you are a very snug fit, mademoiselle. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Don't call it a comeback, baby. Oh man. Oh my freaking goodness. Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. Oh, look at that. Heck yeah.
And that is it for part 1, you guys. Thank you so much for sticking around until the end. In the next part, we will get into the sanding, the staining, and the soldering. Everything that we did right up leading to the actual install. So if you guys would like to follow along, by all means, hit that subscribe if you have not already, and I will see you guys in the next video.